Hello everyone and welcome to this new European Bauhaus Festival event on reading in sustainability published book. My name is Quentin Deschandelier. I'm the legal advisor of the Federation of European Publishers and I will be acting as the moderator for today's discussion. So it's not going to be news for anyone, at least I hope. Climate change is something that affects us all, whether as citizens or businesses, and it is our collective responsibility to make our activities more environmentally sustainable. This, of course, applies to the book sector and publishers as well. And they actually have been working for quite a long time to make their business environmental friendly. I'm sure we will discuss that today in more details with our guests. But for instance, publishers have been already ensuring that the wide majority of the paper used to print their books come from sustainably managed forests or from recycled papers. And books in general have the advantage that once they're being bought by consumers, they tend to have a very long lifetime because people like to keep their books. When they don't want it anymore, they tend to give them away or sell them away so they don't end up in the bin. Like, for instance, myself, in my own library, I have some books that my parents bought back when they were my age. But there's always room to do more and better, and publishers are committed to do so. And that's why we have great speakers with us today to tell us about the efforts that are being made and required by publishers at different levels to make our sector more sustainable. So our first guest is Christophe Koroknai, who is the sales manager and press officer of the Austrian publishing house Eyman Verlag, which specializes in literary and non-fiction books. So Eyman Verlag has implemented a production process called cradle-to-cradle to print climate-neutral books, and he will be telling us about this. Our second guest is Fanny Larsson. She's the communication and project manager at the Swedish Publishers Association, so the trade association representing all publishers in Sweden. She is responsible within the Publishers Association for a sustainability project, involving the Swedish publishers, booksellers, online booksellers, and streaming services. And finally, we will welcome Peter Kraus from Cleff. He is the president of the Federation of European Publishers, which is the voice in Brussels of the great majority of European publishers. He's also the CEO of the German Publishers Association and has more than 20 years of experience working in German publishing houses. So before we start our discussion, a small disclaimer and house rules. So we are live on YouTube. So viewers, you are more than welcome to and free to react and discuss among yourselves in the chat. But for technical and timing reasons, we will cover any questions only at the end of the discussion. So if you want to ask a question to specific speakers, post it in the chat and we'll get back to it at the end of the discussion, time permitting. Let's actually dive into it. Before we start the conversation, however, dear guests, first, thank you all very much for being with us today and exchanging on this very important and interesting topic. Is there anything that you would like to add briefly about yourselves before we dive into the discussion on something that I would have forgotten? Nothing? Perfect. Well, then I will start my questions then. First, I will have a question for you, Christophe. So we discussed that Eyman Verlag has this cradle-to-cradle production process. So could you explain us a bit what it is and how it can actually contribute to the publication of sustainable books?
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you guys and to present something that is very important for us, our cradle-to-cradle production. So let's dive into maybe the notion of what cradle-to-cradle actually is. So as we all know, it's an eco-label and it aims to make papers, inks, and other print products safe for people and planets while preserving resources. So it's a driver for a more healthy print world, I could say, but it's also moving beyond the catchphrase of sustainability and towards a more holistic circular economy, let's say. And that is the key. Cradle-to-cradle also moves beyond classic recycling, where more than 40% of the waste products are separated from the cellulose and that are wasted too, and sometimes have toxic ingredients. So the cradle-to-cradle approach aims to reintegrate all products in a closed-loop economy. The first step is to ensure the harmlessness of all the involved materials, like ink, papers, glue, Irrespective the products are fresh or recycled. That means after maximum number of times the paper fibers can turn in the paper cycle, all the products can be reused. For example, even the de-ink sludges are used as fertilizer or can be used for humus formation and go back into the biosphere, the energy recovery or to the soil. So actually, in this moment, there is a big research going on continuously, assessing, finding substrates, plant-based colors, and all materials. But not only the materials are important in this production process, but also economic and social aspects are taken into consideration. For example, social justice, only renewable energy in the production of the books, water stewardship, and of course, what I already told you, so the materials all have to be non-toxic and they can be easily reintegrated into a natural circular process. So I think as for now, there is no book with a C2C gold status yet, as far as I know at least. And as far as I heard in discussions, the biggest issue at the moment is the glue. With a partner, we are experimenting with 7 different types of products. But there are a lot of books that are cradle-to-cradle silver certificated. And yes, with our imprint Löwenzahn, so that's a label of our publishing house, we started implementing cradle-to-cradle in 2019 when we launched a complete cradle-to-cradle produced program. So yes, that's for first introduction. I think it's important to see cradle-to-cradle as a more holistic approach towards sustainability than just recycling waste paper. And yes.
And a bit of a follow-up question this time for everyone to discuss a bit freely. So I understand that this cradle-to-cradle approach is aimed to be holistic. It's more within the context of a circular economy approach. Nothing is wasted, everything is reused. So do you think, Peter, Fanny, Christophe, that is something that is scalable, that meaning that all publishing houses could realistically implement in their own processes?
Well, what I heard so far, Quentin, is that many publishing houses already made some books in cradle-to-cradle, but not the entire list. And I think we have to differentiate between also backlist and front list. That means what's going on when you have to replace old titles on stock. Can you switch over to cradle-to-cradle, or when you say for a bigger publishing house, when you have 400 new titles per year, is your production department capable of doing this? Then also it's a question of the calculation. Can you manage this? But as Christophe said, it's a holistic approach, and I think we have to make our best efforts to get experiences and get experienced with these sort of production.
Yes, I would totally agree, and maybe I can just shed some light to the beginnings of this decision, because in the beginning it seemed to be a very big investment for us as a smaller independent publishing house to go that way. But actually it was kind of logic, because Löwenzahn is a publishing label that was already working a lot with self-sufficiency, sustainability, ecologic thinking, and it's kind of written the DNA of our label. So that is focused on garden books and guidebooks. So we decided to take responsibility and take our self-proclaimed goals by the word. So that was the first step. And for now, we recently changed almost every part of our production, even our novels in the Heimund Verlag, to C2C at least what hardcover is concerned. And it's kind of counterintuitive. So it's kind of absurd, the thinking in the beginning to lower the margin, but it was really a switch of perspective to invest a certain degree of money into research and idealism, if you want so, but the bigger scale and the bigger idea of an entire industry to be tackled this way is, of course, a bigger picture we have to bear in mind. Yes.
What about you, Fanny? What's your take on it?
Well, first, I think it's a really interesting and inspiring approach, and really impressive to be able to start small and, I mean, include all of your books. Now, I think it's there's a lot to learn from projects like this one for everyone in the industry, I believe. Generally, I think you have to view sustainability work as a long-term one, and you also have to recognize that not everyone start at the same place or are able to move forward at the same pace. But however, I think with examples like this one, you see that it's possible, and that's hugely important to be able to see that you can do things differently, even though you're not a huge publishing house. And I think that's one of the main takeaways from this one example, that maybe if you aren't, even if you aren't able to implement it fully, although I understand it's an holistic approach, but even if you aren't able to be there at first, perhaps you can implement it partly, and that will still change the process, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, as you mentioned, it doesn't have to happen everything tomorrow. It's a process. It takes time. I don't know, Christophe, how long it took for your publishing house to make the transition from the previous system that you had to the cradle to cradle. So, like Fanny said, it can be indeed like more of a long-term process. I mean, then the question is that it doesn't have to be too long-term, but yeah, it's a compromise to reach.
But I might add something, because we face manifold challenges these days in production, especially, and I think maybe it's an ambivalent situation. But on the same time, we have maybe the chance of a little takeaway and a glimpse of advantages of thinking in smaller cycles, because right in the moment, as we know, as paper prices explode and supply chains are compromised, maybe that's a little thing we're working together with one printing plant, and so maybe it doesn't hit so hard because we are thinking in a smaller cycle. But of course, we also have a backlist, and of course, we have to take a lot of long-term considerations. We have to bear them in mind, and it's not as easy as it seems on the first look. But it was quite a clear decision to make it this way. And 3 years later, I think in January this year, we decided to switch all our hardcover outputs in novels and literature also to cradle-to-cradle certified books. So we have certain shortcomings and problems with a certain range of products, of course, because you have to be able to calculate it. For example, with the paperbacks, it's not yet possible, and different ornaments on the books. We had to say goodbye to them, but yeah, we have our priorities, and yeah.
And is that something that you have, for instance, discussed or promoted with the Austrian National Association? Because here we have also Fanny and Peter, who are the head of the respective national associations. So is that something that you've been trying to advocate to encourage other Austrian houses, publishing houses to take on board?
It's a difficult question, because I'm not in charge of that. But actually, yeah, of course, we are talking a lot about this issue also with colleagues, and it's quite interesting that one of the most frequently asked questions in the beginning were, how were you able to invest so much money, and what are you expecting as an outcome for all this investment? But as I said, it was kind of a switch of perspective in the beginning, and I think after some years we can say that it worked out quite well, even in an economical sense, especially for the Löwenzahn Verlag, because it's also kind of a question of responsibility, awareness, credibility, and of course also of the products themselves. And
but for instance, publishers have been already ensuring
that's, I think, as I said, what we are standing for right now, and it's written in the DNA. So I think it also brought us a lot of attention and curiosity. I think also from other partners or other publishing houses in the book business.
And a bit also as the transition to the next point we're going to discuss, for Peter and for Fanny as a head of a national and European association, is that cradle-to-cradle, do you see that's something that you would encourage your members to look into, to eventually adopt? Is that the kind of initiative you look out for when you're working on sustainability? Maybe Peter first.
Well, I think what trade organizations can do on national and European level is to enable their members to have an exchange on their respective experiences, to do peer-to-peer reviews, for instance, to connect an Austrian publishing house with a Portuguese publishing house, saying that, look, here's someone, call Christophe if you want to know more about cradle-to-cradle, or call João. This is the great thing of a trade organization, that you can bring together different members, different perspectives, and help them make more out of their own experiences. And I think that's what we have to do. I wouldn't say that the only path to reducing our carbon footprint is cradle to cradle, but it's one of the issues, and as we said before, it's a holistic thing. On the other hand, is we need these peer-to-peer approaches, and we need to be pushy, because 65% of all global gross product is under the carbon neutral seal in 2050, 65%. And in 2030, the EU will become, or is aiming at, even if they lose in parliament some elections, as we heard, we want to become climate neutral. So 2030 is not that far away. We did the same when it comes to accessibility. It's June 2025, where we started at a very early stage and helping our members, enabling them to meet the obligations they will then be confronted with in June 25. Now it's same with 2030, and I think it's true for the Börsenverein as well as the Swedish Publishers Association, as well as for FEP, to help our members be ahead of what will happen, and not to only react. And that is why I think it's great having Christophe here and helping him to connect with other publishing houses in exchanging their best experiences.
What about you, Fanny? What's your take?
Well, I can only fully agree. I mean, as the Swedish PA or all the PAs, our job is to enable our members and to help our members. We can't be the one demanding them to do anything, but we can show them the way and connect them with others who are doing the work they want to be doing. So I think that's, I can only agree with Peter, yeah.
Well, actually, let's stay with you, Fanny, for my next question. So we've heard from Christophe what an individual publishing house can do to become more sustainable. So it was the cradle-to-cradle approach. But what about a national association like the Swedish Association? What kind of initiatives have you been taking to help publishers become more sustainable?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned at the beginning, we have launched an initiative together with the booksellers, the online booksellers, and the streaming services. And our goal is to both map the total emissions of the Swedish book sector, but also to be able to create networks and share knowledge and best practices among each other. And not just publishers to publishers, but publishers to retailers and retailers to publishers, because we believe that it's very important to follow the book through the whole chain. And at the Swedish PA, we began working with this project nearly 2 years ago. Prior to that, we hadn't really done so much regarding sustainability, but as we all know, the climate change is one of the biggest issues at our time, and it felt obvious that we as the PA should address this in some kind of way. primarily because we have an responsibility, but also because we believe it's crucial as a publisher to be able to answer both to your authors, but also to your readers. What are you doing in the sustainability work area? And to us, it's important to lead the way for the book industry as a whole, but it's equally important, as I mentioned before, to be able to give this service to our members. There's quite a few publishers in Sweden who are already doing pretty advanced sustainability work, but it's an expensive and time-consuming process, as we all know. And if you're a small publishing house, it might not be able to prioritize this. You have your day-to-day work, which at times I believe is more than enough. So we wanted to make sustainability work more accessible to all of our members. And we soon realized that we wanted to do this together, the whole book industry. And the response has been really, really positive, I have to say. But of course, it has taken some time to decide what our aims and goals should be. So it wasn't until February this year that we really started working. And right now, our consultants are working on a report on the Swedish book sector's total emissions. That report will be published at the Gothenburg Book Fair in September. And we will see that report as something of a starting point from the results published there. We will take the discussion further, arrange workshops and seminars for the participants, and to help them to guide them. How can we be more sustainable in the future? And I think this togetherness is one of the most important insights we've had. This is not an area for competition. It's an area for help and sharing your knowledge among each other. Yeah.
Well, then I can open with my discussion follow-up question, so to say. So we've heard Christophe talking about what an individual publisher can do. Fanny, you just explained what the role of a national association can be. But just like you mentioned, even if togetherness when it comes to sustainability is something that we can all strive for, we can try to achieve, because climate change is not something we should compete negatively about, rather the contrary. But do you think that the effort on sustainability are something that should be shouldered mainly, if not only by publishers, or is it enough, or should we involve, and I don't want to share the burden, but also encourage other actors of the book change to act, to contribute, and what kind of things they can do on their end? So Peter, maybe what's your take on that?
Well, I think we can't shoulder the burden alone, or would put it more positively, would frame it differently, saying we should all have the same goal in becoming, in reducing our carbon footprint. And this is, if you have to look at the value chain, I think it starts with the printers, or even with paper manufacturers. You know, at the moment we have a crisis in supply of graphic papers for books, which makes it even more difficult in finding sustainable papers to be used for our books. And if you look at one of the mega trends is deglobalization. Why should our trees be chopped down here, then be transported to China, then be produced with coal energy produced paper mills into books, then printed in China, and then shipped back to Europe? So we should have a look also when it comes to our logistics. And it's also the booksellers. I think it's when the Germans are very keen on having crispy new hardcovers, which have been turned into a foil, it's transparent foil. And we gave it up some 2 years ago. And many booksellers said that they had a hell of a lot to explain to their customers. Why is this book no longer in a transparency, in a foil? And then the customer finally accepted for various, but also for environmental reasons. So we have to also empower our bookselling partners to know more about sustainable production, and also to explain. It's like in fashion, you pay by far more for a sustainable T-shirt than you pay for a T-shirt which is sold at Primark and produced in Bangladesh under conditions we don't really want to talk about. And this is also, when you look at the customer, at the reader, we should be well aware of that they should close the gap between their behavior and their consciousness. It's there should be a certain willingness to pay more for a sustainable product than there is to pay for a book or another product which is sold under usual conditions. And that is why we should talk with each other. And we in Germany at the Börsenverein have the chance, because we cover, we are the voice of the booksellers and the publishers and the wholesalers and those who do logistics. And if you look at this, how is a book produced? How is it transported? And we should also look at how many books do we really produce. We should avoid overproduction. This can be done through by means of smarter decision-making processes, probably powered by artificial intelligence. When we talk about first print runs, but also reprints. And this is to make a long string of pearls short. No, we can't carry the burden alone. Or this challenge, this is for having a brighter future from an environmental point of view, has to be tackled by the whole value chain and also by our readers, I think.
So maybe I will turn to Christophe. So as part of the cradle-to-cradle approach, for this circular approach of book, do you have discussions with like the paper producers? Do you have a discussion with the booksellers? That let's say a global dialogue that you have engaged with your partners in the book chain?
I would first like to add to what Peter said, that I completely agree, if you allow. And I think if you only look at the printing process, our common interest should be that there is an incentive for other publishing houses, for other clients to look at these certificates and to invest. And maybe the consequence will be that there is more incentive and engagement on behalf of the printing plants to invest in more research, in more technology, to find the glue quicker and to build the facilities. And I would also, I'm thankful that we tackle this issue of overproducing, because it's, I think, one of the biggest dilemmas publishing is in. So we really have to print a lot of books in order to keep them at a affordable price. On the other hand, we all have thousands of books in storage rooms, and after some years, they are handled in a manner that nobody could call sustainable. So maybe if we manage altogether to burst forward in research and investing in, for example, cradle-to-cradle, but it's just one example. We could have print-on-demand books cradle-to-cradle maybe in some years, and also maybe we should think about how we communicate and how we sell new technologies like print-on-demand that are in another different way, of course, and in another quality, but also maybe more sustainable than 10,000 books stored for 5 years somewhere in a warehouse, so before being, I don't know, thrown away or wasted. But of course, that's I think a big issue on the core of publishing itself. So, yeah.
Going back to you, Fanny. So this initiative that you have with within the Swedish PA. So you said that it's the entire book chain, from booksellers to online sellers, streaming services. So if we talk more about the online part of the market, because naturally people, when people think about the book sector, they think about paper book, but there's also the ebooks and a version of it, or even the online selling of books. So how do you collaborate with these services on the online part of the market to make it more sustainable?
Yeah, it's really important to, I think, understand. I mean, the modern book sector it involves, as you say, both paper books and ebooks and audiobooks. And we wanted to include all of them, because from an author's perspective or a reader's perspective, this is all a part of the industry. And I think, I mean, we all know, as I think Christophe said, when you have bought the book, you can read it several times, you can lend this to a friend, and the climate impact is done when you receive the paper book. The digital books, on the other hand, I mean, you have every time you read it or listen to an audiobook, you have to consider how the energy is produced, the tab that you're reading on, and so on. And I don't think we are able to answer these questions yet, but we feel it's important to take in all these perspectives. And I mean, we all know that for the sector as a whole, it's the printing process and the papers that's the biggest emission factors. But that's only one time. For the digital books, it lives on each time you read it. Yeah.
And this exchange that has been taking place. So how long has it been going on? This initiative?
I mean, formally just like a year. Yeah.
Okay, so it's here at the very beginning. And what kind of outcome ultimately do you foresee or aim at as part of this cooperation across the book chain?
Well, we aim to, as Peter said earlier, to be able to give everyone networks and possibilities to learn from each other. We won't set up hard goals or anything for the participants. For the digital sector, I mean, we are hoping to be able to communicate more insight. What is in a digital book? How does it work from a sustainable perspective?
All right, and going back to you, Peter, do you think that this kind of dialogue approach to the entire book chain is something that can be reproducible, maybe not all across the EU, but something that could be widely encouraged, and something that could be understandable for all the actors beyond the competition issues or the difficulties that the friction that may exist from one part of the value chain with each other?
I think that if we are under the European umbrella together, it will all. If we don't act before we get regulatory issues, then it'll be applied for all our members. So no matter if you're in Romania or in Sweden or in Germany, if there's regulations ahead, then you have to deal with them. And so I think it's better being proactive and say what we all right now already contribute for sustainability. That's also one aspect. Probably this will go beyond our today's conversation, but we should also have a look at the carbon handprint the publisher sector already has. When you look at SDG 17 issues, that how we contribute to education, to a better world with freedom of expression, and the equality when it comes to having not only, although I'm the worst example there, having not only elderly men being on the decisive positions, and I must say that in publishing, it's more colorful than any other industry in Europe, and that's one point. But back to your original question, Kanta, I think that what's true for a publisher in Athens is also true for a publisher in Lisbon, and so that's not the point. Sure, there's always certain regional specialties. For instance, it's easier when you're in Scandinavia, having short delivery ways for paper than if you are in Spain when you need something. But still, it's we live under the same European flag. So,
well, let's stay with you actually, Peter. So like I mentioned, you're the president of the Federation of European Publishers. So you represent all publishers. So everyone around the table here, you represent them at EU level. So but at the same time, you are arguably, as FEP, the one that is the furthest from the ground, because at least I'm in Brussels. When we are in Brussels, we're not exactly doing books. So we're talking about books, but we don't make them. So how do you think at EU level, FEP and other actors can help to impact the sustainability effort of publishers, and also how can the EU help or impact these efforts?
Well, first of all, absolutely right, Quentin. We don't print books in our office in Brussels, but what we started, we had a general assembly some weeks ago where we decided having a working group concentrating on sustainability issues. They're inviting all members to send delegates to this group, having peer-to-peer exchanges, sharing best practices. And at the same time, it's also our duty from a Brussels point of view, talking to the decisive politicians in asking them for support. Because as Fanny already said, it's our industry is more or less small and mid-sized enterprises. So it's these SMEs, there's many publishers, same is true for booksellers who work, have a whole workload and have not the highest return on sales when it comes to monetization of our business. So we need help from the EU to enable us to finance these initiatives, and also having programs where we can jointly do our best together with printers, together with paper manufacturers and booksellers. And this is also a political issue, which will then can be raised by FEP when advocating for our industry.
And so you just mentioned that that Brussels can help by financing, but you also mentioned that earlier that it's also a political issue, that there is legislation. So in the end, if the EU takes legislation, it applies to everyone, and publishers will not have a choice but to apply these rules. So how can FEP act to also make sure that there is legislation that is positive and that doesn't hinder or make it unsustainable for publishers to become sustainable?
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, when we talked about ebooks and so on, it's also to see the platform economy. That's nothing to do with reading sustainably published books, but we have to fight for our how shall we put it? What we all give into copyright, what we all contribute in the value chain when making out of an idea curated book, and this is not for this costs something, no matter if it's an ebook or a printed book, because up to the decision where you decide, okay, I print the book or I publish it electronically, it's the same value chain, it's the same efforts we all put into making a good author, a great author, and making their books greater books. And this is also something we have to be aware of, that probably the younger generation, I'm 55, so but the youngers think the ebook is for free because it's on my device, and this device is just there, but it takes efforts to produce it, and also has a certain carbon footprint. Not only purchasing it, but also keeping it active, and also storing data and so on. This is also something we have to explain, especially to younger politicians. But still, back again, very, very concrete action is making up this working group on sustainability, inviting all members, sending delegates who know, like Christophe, who are experts in producing sustainably, be it electronically or be it in a printed version, and then talk also to the booksellers and again find better ways of avoiding oversupply.
So now to open up a bit the discussion to everyone, still at a European level. So again, we've heard what a local publisher, what a national association can do, and now what European association can do. But we can share good practices. But like for instance, we can encourage talked to Portuguese publishers about what Christophe is doing in his Austrian publishing house, but do you think that the sustainability efforts can be the same all across Europe, meaning that every publisher can just copy-paste what Eamon Verlag is doing and be done with it, or are there specificities that needs to also be taken into account and that can also impact the level of efforts or the level of sustainability that can ultimately be achieved?
Well, I think it's, if I may again answer, we're all different animals, so to speak. So if you're a science publishing house, then you're already more or less completely digital. When you're a children's book publisher with certain gimmicks and special features and the glitter here and a nice transparency there, and talking about deglobalization, either you won't produce these books anymore, or you have to find someone in Europe who does the same manual nitty-gritty issues they are already doing in China. And this is so no publisher is like the other one, be it in Romania, be it in Hungary, be it in Germany. And then there's also some national differences. And we all have to bear this in mind. And that's the fascinating thing. That's why I'm a true European, because if we can, no matter how much compromising will be there, but it will be Europe who has to find an answer to it. And it'll be us. And we should actively search for it and not wait for politicians coming up with further regulations. And that's also a good thing about advocating for our behind your transparency. It said the voice of European publishers. If we want to speak with one voice to politicians about fair regulations and also subsidies to help us in becoming more sustainable, then it is us needing information from our members, and this is why we need these working groups.
So maybe turn to Christophe. What's your take? Do you think that everyone could just copy paste what Eamon Verlag is doing, or there needs to be maybe a more granular approach specific to each publishing house?
I firmly believe that it is. We talked about scalable business and printing, and I think it's a big question of like chicken or egg. What was the first? That's why I said before we have to encourage, maybe even serve as a role model or example, and publicize the idea that this exists, and motivate even bigger publishing houses to be aware, to see these kinds of certificates and to take them into consideration. And that's the moment when printers, many companies along the supply chain will see, I think, the incentive to change something, to invest something. And the big question, of course, is on which end of the supply chain do you start? Because we are talking about publishing houses having the burden. I don't know, because even consumers always have the feeling, sometimes rightfully, to take all the burden, and many prices and investments are given to them in the end. And I think what's most important, or one of the most important things, is what we are doing right here, making things transparent for everybody to understand. Because the example of the book foils is a great example. I think after half a year or a year, there was another kind of awareness and confidence, and the people didn't even cry back the foiled books. And the same thing is true about the platform economy. I think there is no good storytelling about how the costs and how the CO2 footprint, where does it come from when I'm looking at Facebook or Instagram on my phone. I think it's a big communication efforts and a lot of ways and talks to go to make awareness for these things. And let's get back to cradle-to-cradle. I think one of the key assets and the advantages is that I for myself as a sales manager in a publishing house, when we switched to cradle-to-cradle, I started really to be interested in the production of the book, something I didn't see sitting behind my screen and just, I don't know, totally alienated from the physical product, if you want so. And if we manage to talk a little bit more about these realities that our consumers only see at the end, maybe when they're paying their bill and they don't really know how these prices are, how this ebook can only cost 99 cents or €0. We have to entitle them to understand too. So not only all the other colleagues and partners along the way, but yeah, that's what we are trying to do in our publishing house also, because it's something we very offensively talk about every time we go to a bookshop talking about the program, or even with press contacts. We are writing these things in our newsletter to make awareness even towards the clients, so that they see the reality of the products they get in the end of the day.
And what about you, Fanny? Do you think that Swedish publishers, that there are things that they can't do in terms of sustainability that others can do, or that on the contrary, Swedish publishers are in better place to become more sustainable than others?
Well, as Peter mentioned, I mean, of course, thinking like the deglobalization and local and regional stuff. I mean, we have huge forests with all the paper production in Scandinavia. We also have very clean energy. I mean, the starting point for us is perhaps different than from many other countries. But I also think that the publishing industry, even no matter which country you are in, it's pretty much the same. You can't copy exactly what someone is doing in another country, perhaps, but you can learn from each other, and you can tweak it to suit your own circumstances. So I think it's not translatable everything, but I think it's the majority of it, absolutely.
And until now, we discussed a bit what publishers and Publishers Association are currently doing, what they are doing that is good. But if we look a bit more in the future, where do you think publishers could do more? What are the areas that for now are a bit great or not that sustainable they should be, and there are more effort that should be done? And on the contrary, where are there challenges, real challenges that still need to tackle, and we don't know right now how to tackle them when it comes to sustainability? What are the limits? So Peter, well, maybe?
Yeah, I think first is you need to have figures. So you need to have your own ecological balance sheet. You need to know your T0 carbon footprint, and then because you can only measure where you can change scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and then you need a target. Say, for instance, we want to reduce our carbon footprint within the next 3 years by 50%. It's not all about greenwashing, buying certificates, buy the right certificates, but especially concentrate on scope 3 and reduce with the starting point, and then measure again. And this is also true for every European publishing house. Second is we need to tell more about what we already contribute and what we will do in the future, because you out there, when you're the young generation, you've got the right to choose your own employer. And we are also applying for these candidates. It's no longer the case that I'm not a boomer generation, but close to it. So there were many people asking for one and the same job, but now it's many employers asking a smaller number of people to work for them. And I think this is also a point why it's paying off to work in publishing, because it's fascinating, because we contribute a lot to democracy, to freedom of expression, to diversity. And if we add some more, say you can work for a publishing house which is climate neutral, which reduced and does significantly many things, not only supplying you with a bicycle to come to your office by bicycle or to work from home. And this is also something with pride, right? That you can be proud of being in a publishing house. I see Christophe nodding because you, as a sales rep, sales director, it's a different story where I can say, I'm really proud of my product. I'm proud of my authors, but I'm also proud of the way I produced this book. And this is something we need to expand in the future. And then, so it's measure, target, and tell about it.
And since you're talking about Christophe, in your answer to your first question, you mentioned that there were issues with glue. For instance, that for now, glue, you don't know yet how to handle it, make it more sustainable. So beyond the issue of glue, is there in other areas where you see that cradle to cradle could be improved? Because you mentioned that right now, even Verlag is producing like a silver level of sustainability, but there is no books to your knowledge that has reached the gold standard.
Yeah, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're in contact with our printers, and we're like the first row to be up to date about what they're researching at, and they're experimenting with the glue. So I think that it's state of the art. But as I said before, I think you should make it more attractive for other people to other companies to get into the race of finding the best glue and invest in these technologies. And otherwise, I'm almost hesitant to add something because Peter's endnote was so beautiful. Yes.
Well, then until you get inspired to compete with what Peter said, maybe I move on to Fanny. What are in your discussion that you have been having with the entire book chain? What have been the areas that have been identified as, I don't want to say problematic, but challenging?
Well, I can only agree with Peter. I think it's really important to communicate to the readers, to the customers. I think many readers, I think, view sustainability as an important issue, but perhaps not reflecting in their consuming behaviors. And I mean, that's not just the publishing industry, that's every retailer all over the world that has to tackle this issue. So I think you have to be able to tell the readers what we are doing and why we are doing it. And I think it was really great to hear you, Christophe, say that you were more involved in the production process now and more interested in it, because I think that's also key, to involve all the employers at the publishing house and also the booksellers to be able to understand fully how a book is made and how it's how the choices impact the carbon footprint. I think that's really important and really, really difficult to do. I mean, it's I see that as a not a problem, but an
area of growth.
Yeah, exactly.
And something that has been mentioned by several of you until now is the idea that, okay, we need to get out there to talk to consumers and let them know what we are doing, and also to an extent let them know, okay, are you becoming sustainable as a cost? We talked a bit about the deglobalization of logistics and all that, so are consumers ready to pay more? But to do that, you need data. You need to be able to pinpoint where you've become sustainable, communicate it. And at the moment, do we have the tools to measure sustainability by publishers, and are there enough data to make it something that is understandable and wide enough and meaningful enough? So I don't know who wants to dive into this matter first.
There's an international standard. I think it's called Greenhouse Gas Protocol, where you can it's the gold standard to measure the carbon footprint of something. There are different suppliers who consult you and help you setting up a scheme how to measure. That's also a point, Kantan, where the FEP and national publishing associations can help their specific members in connecting them with the people who are specialized in making these balance sheets. But I want to, again, Fanny, one thing, those outside there who will listen to us, I want to do a little advertising on the beauty of working in production in a publishing house, especially nowadays, where José Saramago, famous Nobel Prize winning Portuguese author, once compared a production guy of a specialist with the goalkeeper in a football team. And today it's even more challenging and more interesting working in production, because it's data management, it's knowledge of sustainability, it's the beauty of typesetting, it's everything. And so if you are not yet, not excluding the five of us, but if you're not yet chosen what to do in your professional life, inform yourself and become a production specialist in a publishing house, because it's really a wonderful job.
If you want to start a job in production, reach out to Peter. He will hook you up. Any other takes on the whole how what efforts can be made towards consumer to inform them, to let them know how to make sustainability in the book sector meaningful for them and appeal, create I don't want to say a commercial appeal, but make it an advantage for people, to encourage them to buy your books. I don't know how Christophe, how do you put that towards your consumer? How do you make it?
For example, we have a little folder with bite marks on it, so to say that you could even eat the book if you want to, because it's there are no unhealthy materials and not really any harmful things inside. So that's something that is directed, of course, at our consumers, but also we bring them along to booksellers for them to distribute, and talking about these issues and this engagement is also, I think, a big part of what we are doing in sales at Heimon and Löwenzahn, because depending on the book, we have a target group that is very conscious towards the things. So these are genuine USPs to say, your book is cradle to cradle, or maybe more than that, there are less than USPs, because they are almost, it would be a problem if we would produce otherwise. Let's say a book about self-sufficiency that treats topics, political topics, or like economy for the common good, and we are failing on our own ideas and our own content. I think we are right now, it's at a level that would be a huge fallback to not being able to tell where books are printed, for example. And yeah, I think we're trying our best to communicate these things. Of course, the certificates are on our catalogs, and we talk a lot about it on social media. On our book covers, you see the certificates linked to some further information. Yes, that's more or less part of the package. We also had the occasion, luckily, to be able to talk a certain amount about these topics in interviews, because we raised some eyebrows with our offensive communication of these topics.
But since we're here under the Festival of the New European Bauhaus, funded and founded by the Commission, I think what we need, European publishers, is help and support from EU, and also becoming subsidies, because as we said before, and it's true for a smaller publishing house and for a bigger publishing house and for industry, the income is not that high as we sell cars or anything. So if we want our industry to change, and believe me, we are really internally motivated, highly motivated to do so, we need subsidies to help our publishers meeting the future obligations. And we are actively and proactively doing what we can, but it would be great, probably under a new European Bauhaus, to get sufficient funds and subsidies to help our members in being even pushier than they are at the moment.
Since we are doing like calls on what should be done to help publishers to become sustainable, like what would be for each of you the thing that would really help your work at your level to make publishers more sustainable? What is, I don't want to say what is the silver bullet, but the thing that would really boost and the efficiency of your efforts. So Fanny, for instance.
Well, it's hard to choose one, and I think actually these sorts of conversations are really helpful to see what others are doing and to be able to tell our members about it. I think that's the key. But also, as Peter mentions, we need help from legislation and regulations. We need support. The industry isn't that big and it's not that much money. So we really need it.
What about you, Christophe? What would really help MN Verlag to do more?
Subsidies, plus in the long term, a different perception, or I would like consumers closing the gap between their consciousness and their behavior and the willingness to pay more for higher quality and for sustainable products.
Do you agree, Christophe?
Absolutely. I don't have much to add. I think what motivated me, first place, let's put it in another way around, is talking with our readers, listen to their criticism, and getting involved in researching myself and talking about it, where the books really come from in the end. And that was something that really boosted my motivation. And I would say it's like Peter drew this beautiful image before, working at a place, standing behind your values, liking what you're working for is a huge gratification. And that's why I like being in my job. And it's an important part of it not to destroy the environment as a benefit. So I think that's a huge issue for me out of a personal perspective, but it should concern all of us as a society. And yeah.
Well, with such a message, I feel almost compelled to stop the discussion. It has nothing to do with the fact that we have reached the time that we have allocated for ourselves. But it was I think a very interesting discussion. We learned a lot of things. I'm sure that our viewers also learned the things and maybe got food for thoughts for their own efforts, whether in publishing or elsewhere. So I think that sustainability is something that in publishing and elsewhere is something that we could and we should talk about for hours. But for today, we only had 1 hour, so that's gonna be it for today. I had a lot. I tried to take note of takeaways, but there are so many of them that I will not go into another half an hour of repeating what you just said. But I really like, for instance, the idea of togetherness of publishers that Fanny put together. I also like the stakes that was raised in the review of the logistics chains for publishers with the idea of deglobalization. How do we make sure that does it make sense to send a book to China to be printed and to bring it back to Europe? It was also really interesting to see how far sustainability can go when the publisher really puts its mind to it. Like I was genuinely positively surprised to hear that under your efforts at MN Verlag, I don't want to say the book waste, but the waste after book production ended up being fertilizer to help nature grow back. So it was really interesting. But again, it's just the beginning of the conversation, and all that remains for me to do is to thank all our guests for at their time to answer our questions, and for this exchange. I hope that even yourself you learn things from each other. You got inspiration from from each other, and of course to thank our viewers for following our discussion. So just as a reminder, the replay, of course, of this event will still be available on FEP's YouTube channel. So don't hesitate to share it around, to hopefully inspire more people to get involved into sustainability, and to small self-advertisement. Of course, follow FEP on social media, follow Eamon Verlag on their social media, follow the Swedish PA on their social media. You have all the links below. You will have the links necessary in the description of the video. And well, on this note, thank you again, Fanny. Thank you again, Peter. Thank you, Christophe. And I wish you all a very good end of the day, and well, goodbye, everyone.